My profession is hardwood flooring. I've been doing that for a whole long time, own the business now, it's been nice. I've got a wonderful wife and 5 going on 6 kids. And I'm just kind of a regular guy, more credibility than anybody else. Part of what I enjoy about my job is that because I've been doing hardwood flooring for so long, it's a loud job, it's noisy, I'm always wearing headphones. So usually I have it hooked up to Bluetooth to my phone. So past several years I've been listening to podcasts and researching things as kind of my hobby for sometimes 5 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it's become somewhat of a passion and a hobby of mine to study lots and lots of topics. So I could probably do some form of presentation on a dozen things, but this one's one of my favorites. A little other thing about me is, I served a mission in Mississippi, and it is pronounced Mississippi. There's something I learned while being down there is that I could never get through to people unless I could get them to say 3 words. So in order to learn, there must be a willingness to say these 3 words. And if I hear them, I'm going to call it out. But first, I'm going to see if it happens spontaneously. So I'm going to show you guys some pictures, and I want to have just a general feel of what do you guys think these pictures are?
That's Temple Square.
So it's Temple Square.
Yeah.
But it is the
church headquarters.
Yes, church headquarters. It is the landscaping they're currently putting in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not currently finished. Here's another one.
Top of the conference center.
Yeah, that's the conference center.
Which temple is?
That's Timpanogos.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, that looks like Timpanogos.
This is where my wife and I were sealed.
Yeah.
So these are easy ones so far. Maybe this is a little trickier. No,
Independence?
St. George? Manti?
So that's Joseph and Hiram on horseback. That's
Well, yeah.
a beautiful little statue. Okay, here's a little harder one.
Moon, Mars.
Is that Kennecott? They say you can see Kennecott from the Space Center.
And one of you said the thing that I was looking for. It's Mars.
Oh, okay.
The scar, the big scar across the face of Mars. But more importantly, one of you said my favorite 3 words. I don't know. Because when you say I don't know, you open your mind to learning. Here's another one.
I'm guessing that, is it Powell?
This is Monument Valley.
Oh.
Kind of a cool landform. Here's one that should throw everybody off.
A DNA strand?
This is a map of the universe.
Oh.
Does that look like it came from a Big Bang?
No.
You guys said things like synapses of the brain, organized matter.
Yeah.
Here's another puzzly one.
That's Jupiter.
Not Jupiter.
Saturn?
Saturn. That's the North Pole of Saturn.
Oh, wow.
If you notice, it's a little odd. That's not a circle. That's
It's a hexagon.
Would you be willing to go back one slide?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, Socrates was once asked how he was so intelligent, how he knew so much. And he said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Obviously, he knew things. He knew that he knew things. But there's a lot of wisdom in knowing that there are things you don't know. And being open to learning based on knowing you don't know things. Joseph Smith said that a man is saved no faster than he gets knowledge. For if he does not get knowledge, he will be brought into captivity by some evil power. I believe our exaltation or advancement in this life is based on knowledge, far more than just a physical accomplishment. But I think the most important thing about this quote is that idea that when you don't have knowledge, you can be brought into captivity by an evil power. To me, this is the reason why the word of wisdom is important. We focus way too much on just don't drink, smoke, etc., and not that the reason why we don't do those things, or the reason why the other parts say eat good food, is because evil, wicked men in our day are combining and designing ways to ensnare us. And they're using food to do it in the case of word of wisdom. So what I'm talking about today, I believe, is another one of those things. Another one of these destroyed knowledge categories that is bringing us into a form of captivity. And that captivity is less physical and more our knowledge. George Orwell said the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their own history. So our history, as we know it, has been corrupted and perverted. It's being taught by corrupt people who have taken over an education system and basically put us all in a box of here's what you're allowed to learn. Now repeat it back to me as these formulated tests. If we go against these things, we tend to be considered crazy. Brigham Young has a quote where he says, "It's been observed here this morning that we are called fanatics." I'll skip, I don't want to read the whole quote, but I feel like you probably would relate to that. A group like this has probably been called fanatics by some other people. He says, "I will tell you who the real fanatics are. They are they who adopt false principles and ideas as facts and try to establish a superstructure upon a false foundation. They are the fanatics, and however ardent and zealous they may be, they may reason or argue on false premise till doomsday, and the result will be false." So again, we're surrounded by false knowledge, and it's taught as truth through a structure of our education system. The doctorate system is meant to be conform, and then suddenly you can be an expert on how well you conformed your whole life to someone else's knowledge. So specifically, as I mentioned earlier, I'm speaking about a little bit of heavens, of the relation to the earth. The way the science is taught today, as you saw with that slide of the universe, that doesn't quite look like the Big Bang Theory, but that you have to conform to fit into the modern education system. To go against Big Bang, to go against evolution, to go against some of these principles puts you in a category of excluded from science. So the science taught today is called Uniformitarianism. It's a big word for everything you see right now is how everything has been, and everything will be. So if you look outside, well, it's rained a few times, it's snowed a few times, but that's as much change as you'll ever see. So when geologists look at the earth and they try to analyze, well, how does this form? How does that form? They look at sedimentary layers and they say, well, I look around me, I don't see layers being formed very rapidly, so this must be a multiple million-year process, billion-year process. They look at canyons and they say, well, there's a river flowing through it, it's carrying away this much sediment right now, so project that into the past, this canyon must have taken multiple billion years to form. And they project all of these things on each other. They date these things as well using circular reasoning. They say, well, this fossil is this old because of this sedimentary layer that it's in. And then you ask them, well, how do you know how old that sedimentary layer is in? Well, we know it by how old the fossil is. So they do this circular reasoning of how they get dates and ages. It's not all carbon dating. And even then, carbon dating has its flaws. This theory was come about by a man named Charles Lyell. He was a geologist who focused on this gradual process, but in particular, he was a close associate to Charles Darwin. His explanations is essentially what the science of our day is all founded on, this idea of uniformitarianism, with very few exceptions. And also that God hath set his hand and seal to change the time and seasons, and to blind their minds, that they may not understand his marvelous workings, that he may prove them also and take them in their own craftiness. So the world today is very crafty, but they are blind to how God does work with the earth. The times and seasons that we live in have changed, but what have they changed from? So again, one thing that is slowly making its way in is called catastrophism. It's an idea that geological change can happen rapidly. The one that scientists kind of accept is this idea that a meteor wiped out the dinosaurs. That is a hint of this idea of catastrophism. But apparently that's the only one. Everything else has been this slow accretion over time. So as we look at the Earth and its surfaces, there's, of course, what we see, gradual, but there's evidences out there of difference, a little more catastrophic stuff. So modern geology has their interpretation of catastrophism as mostly volcanoes, floods and earthquakes on a local level. Gradualism, that same, like I mentioned, idea of slow erosion. And then that rock strata uniformitarianism idea, right? So there's a lot of evidences, however, against them. There's a lot of evidences that would say it's not just one layer after another. There have been some catastrophic events. As you see on the far right, there is a fossilized petrified tree. There are forests of petrified trees that go through supposedly millions of years of layers of rock. So either you have a tree that grows through rock, or you have a tree that somehow stands straight millions of years before it's fully petrified. There are a lot of, and I have this little video here. This isn't actually the focus of my presentation, but I think it's a necessary step. There's a video called Cracks in Theory that talks about how many evidences there are that a lot of these layers were laid down much more rapidly than we currently understand. So, again, I'm getting back to that idea of, well, I don't know. Again, you don't have to believe me. Research it yourself. But we should have room for doubt. We should have room for questions. Another wonderful quote is from Socrates, where he says, Aristotle, sorry, that true intelligence is the ability to have two ideas in your mind at the same time that are contrary and still retain the ability to function. So having a knowledge of contrasting ideas, the ability to have a thought that you don't immediately adopt, but you can understand, because we're all so different, it's important just to relate to other people, to understand where they're coming from. Even if you don't agree with their idea, you can understand why they think it. So back to Darwin. Science has nothing to do with Christ, except insofar as the habit of scientific research makes a man cautious in admitting evidence. For myself, I do not believe there has ever been any revelation. As for a future life, every man must judge for himself between conflicting vague probabilities. That sounds like a prophet, right? So obviously, I'm not a fan of Charles Darwin.
Who is?
His theories, I believe, were very corrupt, used for a lot of evil purposes when it comes to eugenics. But he was this parent of this idea of uniformitarianism. Everything is pretty cool.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
There are people in our world also who claim it's not possible to know the timeline of the second coming. It's not possible. He says there's never been any revelation.
Right.
In order to make that kind of claim, you have to have all knowledge and searched all of it to see that that thought's not there.
Exactly.
And none of us have that background.
Again, true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Notice there's still theories.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Still
he's
there's
a contemporary of Joseph Smith. So
Yes.
Here comes truth, and here comes the opposite.
Yes.
Right.
There's a big contrast. Same with Marxism in its introduction. Although there was a lot of setup for that with the Hegelian school and the printing press, all that coming around the same time, the Reformation. So, yeah, good and evil kind of parallel each other in how strong of an influence they are in the world. So this, I think, is a little more in line with what we might think. Miracles cannot be in contravention of natural law, but are wrought through the operation of laws not universally or commonly recognized. This is from Talmage and Jesus the Christ. So there's a lot of things we don't understand about the working of the universe, but I think the most important thing is when we look at these miracles to realize this is an understandable principle, and it's a scientific principle that we just don't quite understand yet. This is a fun quote I just threw in from President Packer talking about how it's not safe to send your kids to school. Our education system teaches these principles as fact, and I believe, a lot of people fall away from our religion because of what they are taught in school. Because they are taught theories of Big Bang, evolution, some of it Marxism, a lot of this stuff, they are drawn away from the church when they spend 90% of their waking day with school instead of parents and their religion. So, what is the religion's influence on these theories? Has our church ever said anything about this kind of stuff? There's an institute manual in 1964 that talked about how the majority of geologists, astronomers, other scientists believe that kind of this uniformitarianism idea explains everything. But as it says here, there are a small number of reputable scholars who disagree. These claim that the geologic clocks are misinterpreted and that tremendous catastrophes in the Earth's history speeded up the processes that normally may take thousands of years. Again, the world looks at the idea of a flood and laughs it off. But if we are to believe Scripture, it must have happened. If we are to believe prophecy and revelation through Joseph Smith, it was a complete immersion of the earth. How could that be possible with this idea of gradualism? So they mention here a man named Emmanuel Viskovski and his books. Now I'm sure probably none of you have ever heard of this man. Emmanuel Viskovski wrote books called World in Collision, Ages in Chaos, Earths in Upheaval. He actually wrote several more. By the time he was still alive when this was going on. So Emmanuel Viskovski was a Russian Jew who was studying into history. At the time, there was a lot of controversy about, well, did the Exodus events even happen? Because if you look at the Egyptian texts, there's no history of some big, massive red water plagues and earthquakes and death of their people at the time that they were projecting that the book of Moses must have happened. So all these scientists are trying to discredit the Bible. Meanwhile, Viskovski decides to go look through these ancient texts. And he dives as deep as you can get into these old Egyptian texts and finds that what people were assuming the dating of the Bible was, well, if you correct it by about 200 years, suddenly you find in the Egyptian records red water that's toxic to drink, all kinds of pestilences, and a massive earthquake, and the death of a ton of their people. They recorded the Exodus events. Not only that, but as he kept digging in other cultures, he found those same witnesses of Exodus-style events in China, in the Mesoamericas, all over the world. People were recording these same kind of occurrences of water turning red and being toxic, of disasters happening, massive earthquake. Not only that, but all of these ancient cultures had a culprit they began to blame. They were blaming it on a comet. Specifically, the comet Venus.
Do you know the year of what year he came up with?
Not off the top of my head. If you read Worlds in Collision, it's in there. So one of his books. The fun thing too, his theories, as he proposed them, were not only discouraged, it was actually banned. His books were literally banned. So you had people like Carl Jung and other scientists of his day who were actively trying to suppress anything he published.
What a surprise.
That said, his book ended up being a bestseller. But even though the scientific community refused to analyze his work, they refused to analyze anything he did. And it turned out he made a whole bunch of predictions, not based on empirical evidence like you would think of scientific research right now, but based on this historical record. He said, well, this planet Venus, for it to do the things that they're saying, had to have had certain different things about it that at the time they assumed Venus was this cold, cool, cloudy planet, probably a lot like Earth. He said, no, it must be super hot. And not only that, it must have like a hydrocarbon and an iron-heavy atmosphere to create the reactions of, if it was somehow proximity close to Earth, to create some of these events. And only far later, in the 70s and 80s, when the Mariner probes were sent out and they flew by Venus, the first one measured temperature. They were expecting 20, 30 degrees at over 600 degrees. And then Mariner, next couple probes that went by, 2 and 3, discovered that temperature to be as high as 900 degrees. They did find hydrocarbon as its primary atmosphere. And Viskovski was essentially vindicated in his predictions. So a few other people who have made predictions in history similarly persecuted. Galileo is one. Galileo theorized that the Earth was rotating around the sun. When he presented that to the public, the Catholic Church hated that idea so much that they put him on house arrest the rest of his life. So we all celebrate Galileo, but not a lot of us are taught about his oppression by the state that was the church at the time. Giordano Bruno was another scientist who theorized that all these stars that exist out there, well, they might be like our sun. And if so, they might also have planets. And if they have planets, they might also have life. So what does that do to religion? So they welcomed him by burning him at the stake. So science in general, as Brigham Young said, science that rejects the current paradigm, you get treated as a fanatic. And quite often, you're criminalized for it. In 2 Peter, it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of this creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth which are now by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So Peter saw that in our day, people would see that everything stays the same ever since creation. Everything's been the same. Everything else is silly, so we scoff at it. But he says that the world that was perished with the flood. So what was the world that was? Well, again, we aren't taught it. Joseph Smith said, "Many men will say, 'I will never forsake you,' but will stand by you at all times. But the moment you teach them some of the mysteries of the kingdom of God that are retained in the heavens and are to be revealed to the children of men when they are prepared for them, they will be the first to stone you and put you to death. It was this same principle that crucified the Lord Jesus Christ and will cause the people to kill the prophets in this generation." So what I'm going to teach you today, to me, is a wonderful mystery. It's a learnable mystery, that we're commanded to learn the mysteries. But you are commanded to learn things line upon line. So if you don't have a Book of Mormon testimony, this isn't for you. You learn line upon line, parable after parable, however it works for you, and as you progress in knowledge, more is going to be available to you. But once you reject one, your progression stops. And that's the meaning of the word damned, is that your progression stops, just like a dam stops water. So again, what is this ancient heavens? Joseph Smith taught that this earth will be rolled back into the presence of God and crowned with celestial glory. This is in the book Infinite Atonement, chapter 12 specifically, by Todd Callister. How could the earth be rolled back into the presence of God unless it was geographically located there in the first place? So we are taught Book of Abraham, Kolob. We used to orbit that, and now we're here. And what is all of that? John Taylor taught that the earth was first organized near the planet Kolob. That gives us some idea of the earth's proximity to God at the time of its creation, since Kolob is the planet nearest to God. So again, what is Kolob? John Taylor also said, if the antediluvians, so pre-flood, enjoyed anything that was good, true, and eternal, which is not yet made known to us, it has to be restored. Or if anything existed among the ancient patriarchs and prophets that has been lost, it has to be restored. So we are at a time of restoration of all things. We are also at a time not just of a knowledge-based restoration of all things, but as I'll soon show, physically, geographically, we need to be restored. But to what? So as Joseph got these visions, as he got the papyra that he translated into the Book of Abraham, there's a lot more there than he revealed. Even when you read the papyrus, as you look at the little notes, there's a whole lot of yet to be revealed, yet to be revealed. Study it out yourself and you'll figure it out kind of revelations. But we're not familiar with this kind of writing, this ancient symbology. It's strange to us. Obviously there's a difference in the two. This is another papyra found at a different time, different place, but it just goes to show you he's not basing, the papyra wasn't made up. There's a lot of similarity. But the similarities, the symbols, those kinds of things, if you look at them, you see the ox, you see a circle in its horns, you see these four statues, the eye, there's so many symbols. And again, if we're not familiar with the meaning of these symbols, it all goes over our head. But if these people, in their proximity to, time-wise, the ancient antediluvians, if they understood something from them, these people probably retained it better than we do, being 4,000 or 5,000 years further down the road. So what did Joseph teach? There was a man named Philo Dibble who was the bodyguard of Joseph Smith at one time. He asked Joseph what these ancient heavens looked like, and Joseph drew this drawing. Totally should be weird to you. That's not the solar system, as you know it, right? So he drew this 3 circles that seem connected somehow on, and this is important, an angle of 22.5 degrees, and the moon and the sun on the sides.
Compass and square.
So again, what is the interpretation that we're supposed to get from how is this an ancient heaven. So there is a thing called a polar alignment that is theorized by Viskovski to have been what the ancient heavens were. Essentially, instead of looking at the North Pole, at the North Star, and seeing the heavens rotate around that North Star, you would have seen this. A stationary sphere in heaven that all of the heavens rotate around. So what is this? It relates to the great star, the Star of Ishtar. So it's a polar alignment, a configuration of planets. In pop culture, there's so much obsession with, oh, the planets align and this crazy thing happens, right? It's because we're remembering something. Now, what were those planets?
Could that be the original all-seeing eye that got twisted?
Yes. So
We didn't hear that.
the original all-seeing eye, you'll start to see here a lot of symbolism. These planets are theorized to be Saturn, in front of it, in a cometary burst, Venus, and in front of Venus, Mars. All aligned. Now, this is the star that was depicted as the sun. The great star, the Star of Ishtar in Babylon. They depicted this sun as resting on a pillar. Stationary. That's not how we draw the sun today. We don't draw the sun as a spoked wheel. It's a circle. That's it. That's the sun, a circle. This symbolism of the sun being a spoked wheel, of having a circle, lines ascending into a smaller circle in the center, is found in all over the earth in petroglyphs, and specifically depicted as a sun. So this is a discourse.
Please.
Sure. So you'll find these kinds of images literally all over the earth, whether it's Chile, Death Valley, Chumash, Nordic, in Mesopotamia. These parallels exist everywhere. And again, why would, if every ancient culture is separate and disparate and had nothing to do with each other, why would all of them have the same depiction and drawing of an ancient sun that's different, at least I would argue, different than the sun we have now? Something that rotates around the sky, something that is just a circle. So, along with Viskovski's work, a lot of people have come since who have studied similar ideas. They've gone into these ancient archaeologies, they've also gone into scientific realms, merged the two, and come up with these theories of what the ancient heavens used to look like. One of these groups is called the Thunderbolts Project. They have an awesome YouTube channel, hundreds of videos. This is a series. There's 20-something videos in this series. They're all fairly short. And they talk about this ancient sky that they call an alien sky.
You've just entered the theater of an alien sky. If the words and images seem strange to you, there's a reason for this. Our world was once a vastly different place. To experience this won't hurt you, and there is nothing to fear.
that is. So these guys do a lot of research into this ancient mythologies. All the different cultures of the world have very similar ancient myths. There is also a scientific research side that they pair up and they do these conferences called Electric Universe Conferences. And again, these aren't members of the church. They are totally disparate scientists. They have no idea Joseph Smith taught anything that could even be slightly related to this. Yet they are proving some of these ideas of a difference in our heaven and a difference in the rotation and axis and alignment of the earth. So there's a man named Birkeland, Christian Birkeland, who studied for himself plasma. This was back in the early 1900s, and as he was studying electricity, he would do it in a vacuum chamber. He'd have this sphere and he would inject this electrical plasma. And he came up with a whole bunch of fun theories that were poo-pooed at the time and now are being actually used in modern science. One of the things that he proposed was an idea of a Birkeland current, named after him, or an idea that electricity travels free flow in space. That space isn't empty, that it is a firmament full of ether, full of electricity or plasma. But this plasma, this energy, is not stationary, that it moves in currents. Again, think of that image of the universe and its filaments connecting. Every one of those dots of lights represent galaxies, the brighter ones, superclusters of galaxies. They were forming, or they exist, along electrical filament currents. So he proposed that there were spirals of energy just traveling through space all the time. That when those spirals of energy, you might recognize it looks a little like DNA.
It's like a DNA strand. Yeah.
When they encounter matter, they pinch. So this current, as it travels, encounters a mass of just unorganized matter, and as it pinches, it creates a Z-pinch effect. It creates a gravitational, static Kling gravitational effect, draws the matter to a point, turns it into a sphere. And with the right elements there, that sphere then becomes lit electrically and becomes a sun. So yonder is matter unorganized. Let us go down. And we organize it into a sphere. And we create a sun. Sorry, I just really like this stuff.
So do we.
So along this alignment of planets, you also would have creation of other planets orbiting the first. And as they do, they would be aligned. The same way that if you think of the moon, it has one face. As far as we know, it has one face because that face points at Earth all the time. If you were standing on the moon, it would look like the Earth never moves and everything else does. The same way was true of this alignment of planets. The alignment is stationary and everything else moves. So as this Birkeland current is formed, as this sphere forms and then Earth around it, we were awed by the birth of Venus. A comet birthed out of Saturn. Then there was an introduction of cherubim, an angel, a sphere that entered and created a flaming sword that went all around this symbol of a tree of life. So the crescent you see is the traveling light from the sun on Saturn. And as you can see also, it rotates counterclockwise relative to what you would think a clock. But that symbol became represented by cultures and people as 100 different things. One in particular is the golden calf. This idea, again, if you think of those papyri, of a cow, an ox, holding heaven in his horns. So many cultures have that same archaeology.
I
On your last page, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What is that in the corner, that light, and what is that?
This here? So this was an electrical projection, most likely from the same way that Venus had electrical interaction with Saturn, so too did it have electrical interaction with Mars and Mars to Earth. And so when these electrical occurrences would happen, it was often aligned with some kind of catastrophe, some kind of event, and people would record it. They'd depict not the planets. We would say the word planet. We would say the word stars. They would say the ox, the bull of heaven, or the god of war just wrecked something. They would use that kind of wording and symbology. So this ox symbol is rife throughout ancient cultures. It is more than just the ox, though. It's that idea. Again, think of the archetype of shape and how many things it could mean. The ox, when Moses went up to see what God would say to him at a burning bush that wasn't being consumed because it wasn't natural fire, he had to take off his shoes so that he was grounded as he ascended the mountain. And the people didn't want to go with him. They were frightened. So what did they build? They built a golden calf. But not just any golden calf. They built this specific symbol. This symbol is seen all over as more than just the golden cow as well. It is Atlas holding up the heavens in his arms. You see it in this idea of the heaven man. So one of the recreated in a laboratory by Birkeland, and since then there's been other groups like the Sapphire Project. They've been able to create these plasma instabilities in laboratories, and all over the world there's these petroglyphs of the heaven man, of a man squatting, the squatting man holding up his arms with these little circles to the side. That far left one is not an image of a petroglyph. That is a photo taken in a laboratory of a plasma discharge.
Wow.
And that archetype, as seen in heaven, became a myriad of other symbols, interchangeable symbols, of arms outstretched, of horns outstretched, of wings, of a boat, of angels.
The Hebrew letter He.
Yes. And it is all related again to this pillar, heaven resting stationary on a pillar.
Back in ancient Egypt, when we were at the Vatican, they had the emperor basically with the sun in the middle with those horns out. There's a lot that ties into the Hebrew
Exactly.
things and the divine right of kings that came into Europe.
Yep, which I'm going to get into that too. So you'll see these symbols everywhere. You'll see them in the Celtic cross, Rosicrucian cross, and you may recognize that.
Just looking at that.
Cool. Devil's Plan.
What is that? Is
I'll-
that the new design?
I've got another slide at that. So here's another one. I showed you an image from earlier of Joseph and Hiram on their horses, but I showed you it from a little different angle than this one. The Joseph Smith Memorial, where there's a obelisk marking his birthplace on the left. This symbol is related to so many other things. In particular, it's related to Mount Olympus, Olympus sitting on a mountain. It's also related to the letters Alpha and Omega. So you have, in the Egyptian records, those same symbols of Alpha and Omega. It also relates pretty heavily to a compass. What does a compass create? You have a compass, and when you put a point down and draw, you get a circle. So again, going back to this polar alignment, right? We have Saturn, in front of it Venus, then Mars, creating this brilliant starburst effect. All these ancient cultures that record similar archetypes. Well, here's another archetype. In the chandelier of the conference center, as you look from below, you'll see a starburst. And above it, bright shining light. There's a little coil you can see there towards the bottom. You have that same three-tiered symbol. Also on the trim and door handles of the conference center, you'll see that same, but we're not worshiping the Babylonian god Ishtar, right? We're using similar symbols, so what could that mean? Why? Or am I just a fanatic?
That means Babylon counterfeited.
Yeah.
Again, you think about it. You have Adam and Eve and all of their children seeing these things in the heaven. And then as cultures disperse after the flood, after the Tower of Babel falls, and they have all their different interpretations and languages, you have 100 different representations of these symbols. On the roof of the conference center, again, you can see a three-tiered ladder. You can see a tiered circle. Not only that, but the pyramids are representing a crescent. And the timing of that crescent is very close to midnight, the archaic day of the gods. And again, on the far left, there's a alignment of 3 circles. One interesting thing too, again, about this idea of alignment, we're still on that axis. We're still on a tilt. When an object forms around another object, if you think of the skip-it toy, right? Where's the axis of the skip-it toy as it rotates around your leg? It's pointed towards your leg. We're not pointed at the sun. We and Mars and Saturn have very similar angled axes. And Venus as well, but it rotates counterclockwise, which is interesting. So you have this ancient symbology represented on the conference center roof. You also have it represented on the grounds.
Can you go back that one slide? Real
Sure.
How did you notice this?
A lot of fun study. There's a few groups, I'll get into like places I research. Again, I'm nobody special. You can research everything I have. If you also know, there's a symbol of some stars at the top of the Salt Lake Temple. It's the Big Dipper, which,
I've
as
seen
tradition
that.
states, points to the North Star. In our temples, you will see over and over this same symbology. Earth is represented as the 4-cornered earth, as Eden has its 4 rivers parting from it. You have what creates a squared earth. We're not actually a square, but why do we call it a squared earth? It's because of the representation of earth being a square, which is created by a square, and heaven being a circle created by a compass. The connection of the two is the square becoming the circle. The circle represents the celestial sphere, the square the telestial, and where they meet is the terrestrial sphere, as our temples. So you'll see these things everywhere in temples. Also, in the Salt Lake Temple, they have this fun little statue that isn't there anymore. It was an angel depicted by this flow of light behind her, an angel of peace. And this same Venus symbology, both in the plant she holds, in the cherubim that surround her.
Oh, could you go back real quick?
Sure. So,
The 2 are?
what's that?
Are there 2 children to the side, or 2?
Yeah, they're little angels, cherubim, children, yeah.
It could be Mother Mary. What's her name?
So all of these symbols are multiples. It's not that one symbol has to be only one thing. There's multiple layers to every one of these symbologies. And they have purpose in their parable forms. Because each one of these symbols can teach us things. Each one of these symbols can be used as, you're currently square, you're a rough stone, but as you chip away at that stone, you can become rounded. Every one of these parables you'll find symbology to. So Venus, again, has this kind of cometary symbology, right? But where does all of that come from? Is there any other evidences that align with it? There was a comet in 1744 that passed, again, pre-photography, yet all of the depictions of people, of the cometary tails of this very close planet, caused all kinds of fires and earthquakes, were these kinds of tails. So you have a very similar electrical discharge as a comet is passing. Again, think back to Venus next to Saturn. This electrical discharge is flowing towards Saturn in all kinds of shapes. This one's a fun one. This is on the Timpanogos Temple trim. And again, a lot of the pictures I'm showing are not from any church resource. They're from these archaeologists who are saying, hey, here's this ancient archetype of Venus. And then we find it today connected to symbols on our temples. One other thing to think of is that crescent, again, as it travels everywhere around that sphere, was represented by an oxen. The introduction of that crescent was the beginning of time. Time didn't exist before. There was nothing to differentiate time. So Adam and Eve lived in a timeless Garden of Eden, a celestial state where life was perfect. Then, as cherubim and a flaming sword was introduced, you have a chaos occur, an introduction of time, in a sense. But it took a while for that to truly fall apart. But that symbol of the ox going around progressed and progressed. It became how they measured clocks. So you'd have an ox head on all four sides, and eventually 12 oxen that would be carrying heaven, representing time and its heavenly sphere. And again, there's a multiplicity of symbolism. This does represent the 12 tribes. This does represent more symbolism, but these symbols also predate Israel. So again, you have font after font after font. There are ancient Christian baptismal fonts all the way back from 200-300 AD that have the oxen surrounding baptismal fonts in old Catholic churches. That they don't do it that way anymore, though. Another fun resource, Hugh Nibley, in his book Temple and Cosmos, talked a lot about how we can't truly understand our religion if we don't have a cosmological frame of reference. If our religion is simply us and our church on this earth, then we won't truly relate to any of the other ancient cultures and their religions. We won't truly understand our own. In his book, he has a fun little papyrus himself of something he found. It's in a temple.
In Dera, Egypt.
Yep. And in the center, there is an ox leg. The ox leg was the Big Dipper. So the Egyptians had that pointing towards the North Star. And all around you have these 12 figures with their arms outstretched, holding up the symbolism. One fun thing in this book, Temple and Cosmos, is he gets into a lot of this stuff. He doesn't say it explicitly, but Hugh Nibley did study some Viskovski. He agreed with some of the modern criticism that he should have put his books in a different order of release and he would have been accepted better. But I kind of like the rebel side of Viskovski a little more. So originally on the Salt Lake Temple, as you may know, there's a lot of symbology. I've already pointed out some. There's earth stones, a whole bunch of them, depicting the phases of the earth. There's moonstones depicting the phases of that crescent on the moon. There's sunstones A lot of those also relate to the Nauvoo Temple. And above those, the original design was to have Saturn stones. One of the proposal designs was that they were only on the south side, so you only see Saturn when looking north. And again, in Kunibli's book, he points out a connection between the symbols in the Nauvoo Temple, and again, in the Salt Lake Temple. John Taylor has a fun quote. He says, "Thou longed, thou sighed, and thou prayed to thy Father in heaven for the time to arrive when thou couldst come to this earth, which had fled and fallen from where it was first organized near the planet Kolob." So again, we see this repeat of teaching from our prophets that there is no parallel to in our current education system cosmology. In the April 1993 New Era, to help youth understand a little bit about the temple, they talked a bit about the star, the moon, the sun symbology. And at the bottom of this little quote, it says, "Saturn stones are located directly below the parapet on each side of the 6 towers. They represent Kolob, the dwelling place of God."
Woo.
Wow.
Now again, there's a lot of research into this that is not for members of the church. There's a lot of, oh, that's esoteric, oh, that's occult. So the fun thing is getting to see some of those and interpreting them from what they are. People who don't know all of the truth but are getting pieces of it, well, they do find some valuable pieces. So this is part of a much longer video.
Bodies as gods. Myths proclaim we once lived in the presence of gods. These gods were visible powers, often unpredictable and frequently violent. The priestly astronomers of ancient Mesopotamia and elsewhere made clear that these remarkable powers were planets. Pictographs show what is commonly considered to be a sun as a huge disk with a smaller one in the center, often with rays flowing out of it, with a third darker circle superimposed in the center of that. Our sun looks nothing like that. In many different cultures, we see a symbol of a crescent with a star in its center. How could this be when there is no star or planet closer to Earth than our moon to form such a configuration? And most importantly, why do so many remote and widespread ancient cultures who most likely could have never been in contact with one another, such as the Sumerians, Egyptians, Chinese, Native American Indians, Mayans, Babylonians, Australian Aboriginals, and many others, all tell the same story and draw similar pictures? If these ancient writings were based on valid observations rather than fantasy, then it is suggested that planets were closer to Earth in the past and they moved in a collinear way, meaning that they were lined up as they traveled through space. For observers on Earth, the result was a unified configuration in the heavens, visually dominated by a large glowing planet, theorized to have been Saturn, then seen without its present ring system. The other 2 bodies in this configuration are believed to be Venus and Mars, with Venus in the middle shining brightly. In many ancient sources, Saturn is called Sun. The usual name for Saturn in Chaldean astronomy was Alap Shamash, meaning star of the sun. Diodorus of Sicily reported that the Chaldeans called Kronos, aka Saturn, by the name Helios, or the sun, and he explained that this was because Saturn was the most conspicuous of the planets. Popular Greek traditions identified Kronos as the alter ego of Helios. Hyginus also wrote that Saturn was called Sol. In the Babylonian astrological text, the word Shamash, sun, was used to designate Saturn and represented by an 8-pointed star in the middle of a disk, or an 8-spoked wheel. If Saturn was always as inconspicuous as it is present, what could have caused the races of antiquity to give Saturn the name Sun, or the Shining One? Ninib was the Babylonian name for Saturn, or at least one of them. Other names include Ninurta, which according to numerous scholars was the inspiration for the biblical character Nimrod. Ninib is said to shine like the sun. Astrologers must have found it increasingly contrary to reason to associate the star that gives us light and life with one of the palest and slowest of the planets. That's where the word Saturnine comes from. It means dark, slow, and gloomy. The Romans named the planet after Saturnus, the god of the harvest responsible for the Golden Age, which is the same as the Greek god Kronos, with a C, and Chronos, with a K, often confused with Chronos with an H, the personification of time. It seems through the passage of millennia, Kronos has been infused with Kronos, who has been infused with death, aka the Grim Reaper, due to the fact that time leads to death. This is why separate searches for all of these characters will reveal them carrying a scythe. The ancient Greeks had 2 words for time, Chronos and Kairos. While Chronos refers to chronological sequential time, Kairos signifies specific opportune moments.
So, again, you have all of these depictions worldwide of Saturn. So, think for a moment, just a little incredulity. Why would every ancient religion, and it's almost every, I think it might be every ancient religion, have Saturn as a deity? There is so many different depictions, so many names. Kronos, Saturn, Thor, Zeus, El or Elis, Baal, Moloch, Jeb, Shani, Zervan, Brahma, Shabbatai, Dagon, Kronos, Nanib, Osiris, Jupiter, Saturnus, Helios, and even Yahweh. All of these are ancient depictions of Saturn. So again, why would all of these ancient cultures worship a far distant spot of light that if you do lots of research you can figure out moves a little different than the rest of those faraway dots of light? So again, some of those images I showed you earlier, there's a lot of symbolism that goes along with Saturn. Not only in the gods that are represented, but in actual physical shapes. So I showed you an image of the North Pole of Saturn with that hexagon shape. The Star of David as we know it was originally not a Star of David, but a Star of Remphan that the scriptures specifically tell you not to worship. The talisman of Saturn here that was recovered, again, the symbol of the ox, the symbol of a crescent. The hexagon extended creates that pattern. Also the pattern of the double triangle, the male and the female. There's so much symbolism in this that I could spend hours just getting into it, but I'm just going to touch on a whole bunch of them. Again, on the left you see a different star. You see the scythe. So that scythe, that reaper blade, that sickle, that crescent that traveled around Saturn creates a lot of these archetypal symbols. If you take so also pay close attention to this one. This is the sign of Saturn, a cross with a sickle coming off of it. When you take that same hexagon shape and you turn it, you get a square. So that hexagon shape, one of the Saturn symbols is a cube. And not only a cube, but a black cube. So you have the Mecca, you have the Tefillin. The Jews put it on their forehead and they rotate little black strings around their arms 7 times. In Mecca, they rotate around 7 times Mecca as a form of worship of the black cube. When a cube is unfolded, you fold one side up, side, and 2 down, you get the symbol of a cross. So all of these things get folded in as various interpretations of Saturn's symbols. Its sign being a cross and a sickle. You know what, I'm going to go back. Another one you may be familiar with is from our educational institution. Hugh Nibley said, "We gather today together in the sign of a false priesthood." In a graduation ceremony, you wear black robes. You wear a cube on your head as you symbolically show with a movement of a tassel your graduation of knowledge from one degree to another. All of these are fallen temple symbols. Wow. We also see it in the robes that judges wear. We see it a lot in signs of government. I'll get into that in a second too. More of Saturn symbols. This is the seal of Saturn, this creation of a double X. So you have the ox, you have the sickle, you have the creation of time. Again, the introduction of the crescent of Saturn was the introduction of time, the introduction of death into the world. So as Kronos has all his names, as Saturn has all his names, he's introducing time. All of these gods begin to be worshipped as also these fallen cultures begin to worship death. So they turned Saturn into Moloch and they sacrificed their children to him. So all of these are essentially fallen priesthoods from a similar origin. Another thing that's fun is the ring has always been a Saturn symbol. Yet Galileo discovered Saturn had rings in about 1500s. So how would rings be a Saturn symbol prior to that date? So the black circles around the head, the rings that you wear in matrimony, they are all Saturn symbols.
Can I just say something? I lived in Saudi Arabia for a while, and those actually come off, and they're the hobbles for their camels.
Yeah.
They twist them and put their arms in it because they don't have fences.
Yeah.
So they just hobble. That just shows they're of the desert. They
Right.
take back their ancient dress.
It's also all over Masonic symbology. Again, another, called by Joseph Smith, fallen priesthood. Sirius is interchangeable anciently with Saturn. So you have that same symbology of a stairway to heaven, of Jacob's ladder, of the tree of life. All of these symbologies have commonality in their shapes. And again, you have the sun and the moon, but what are we supposedly worshiping? A whole different symbol. So how do we explain the Saturnian ring symbology or all these other symbols? Again, it's all this ancient archetype. It's that you would look into heaven and you would see dramatically different things. The rings of Saturn have now been measured, and they have been found that they might just deteriorate in the next 10,000 years. They can't have been millions and millions of years old. So the halo that goes around the saints, or all those depictions of Christ with a halo. A lot of people would be confused and frustrated to find out that a lot of the origins of symbology from Catholicism is this built-in Saturn worship.